Now on BBC One and the BBC HD channel. If you thought you knew nothing about art, think again as Alistair Sook takes a look at another modern master.
Modern art. It sells for a fortune in exclusive galleries. But what's it ever done for us? Has it influenced the clothes that we wear? Or the buildings that we live in? The cars that we drive? The books we read to our children? Even the way that we think? I'm Alistair Sook and I earn a living writing about art. And in this series, I'm going to explore the life and work of four titans of the 20th century. Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali and Andy Warhol. They all changed their world. But have they changed ours? This week, Matisse. The first time I saw a picture by the French artist Henri Matisse, I was just a kid. It was one of his famous blue nudes. Incredibly simple, just one colour with no detail at all, a bit like a primitive cave painting. But something about it fascinated me then, and still does. And since shops like IKEA began selling posters of it, it's everywhere. In student flats, pizza houses, my local gym, and even my granny's got one. But Matisse didn't always paint simple, bold pictures like his blue nude. He began his career as a really traditional painter. He started with intricately crafted still lifes. Then things got much more colourful. Then a lot less detailed. And finally, he gave up with detail altogether and went with pure shape and colour. In fact, he's often called the master of colour. And some even say he created the way our modern world looks. But how and why did he go from this to this? And should we really be grateful that he did? I've come to where Matisse was born around 140 years ago. This is northeastern France, on the edge of the Flanders Plain. It's not far from where Matisse grew up. I'm struggling to think how this place produced Matisse, a man who is known for his sensational use of colour. This is Boham, the town where Matisse grew up. All fairly unremarkable, definitely not picture postcard France. And his parents, far from being artists, were seed merchants. So this is where he lived, which I think might just deserve a picture. Young Henri next to the man with the tash. And me. Matisse was born in 1869 and this is where he grew up. This is the commercial entrance to his parents' seed store and they all lived just upstairs. And by his own account, when he was young, he was a bit of a dreamer. He didn't really know what he wanted to do. He certainly didn't want to take over the family business, which really disappointed his dad. And he certainly didn't think he wanted to be an artist. This is what's left of the view from what's thought to have been Matisse's bedroom. He used to gaze out at the courtyard below, dreaming of escape from his dreary life. This space, if this was his room, witnessed one of the most important transformations in the history of art when Matisse spent many months bedridden. He had a breakdown. He thought it was appendicitis, but some people say it was depression. Matisse was then 19 and was nursed by his mother, Anna. She worked in the family seed store, which also sold house paints that she mixed herself. And she changed his life by giving him a gift to cheer him up: a paint box. He later said, "From the moment I held that box of colours in my hand, I knew that this was my life.
Like an animal that plunges headlong towards what it loves, I dived right in. It was a sort of paradise found, and Matisse was on his way.
There may not have been much art in Boan, but Matisse's childhood was saturated with colour. The town was then a textile manufacturing centre, famous for its vibrant, patterned cloth. Boan's factories are long gone, but nearby, one's still going, supplying lace to fashion houses from Chanel to Louis Vuitton.
This would have been the soundtrack to Matisse's childhood.
In the dyeing plant, yarns are drenched in great vats of colour.
I'm really starting to understand where Matisse got that extraordinary sense of colour from. As a kid, he must have seen colours exactly like these, bright, bold hues, every hue under the sun. Wandering through here feels a bit like walking through the factory of his imagination.
But Matisse's later love affair with colour wasn't apparent in this, his very first painting. Made within just a year of picking up a paintbrush, it shows incredible natural talent, but it's very subdued. But in 1890, muted, sombre works like this were the established mainstream style of European painting, which had faithfully recorded the appearance of reality for hundreds of years. Monet and the Impressionists had begun a rebellion. They discarded meticulous representation to capture instead their impressions of a scene. And they began to use brighter colours too. Stuck in Bohème, Matisse wouldn't have seen their work, but he was about to head to the centre of the art world, Paris.
When Matisse left for Paris in the early 1890s to train as an artist, no one round here could have dreamt what was going to happen, not even Matisse.
His still life with books had hardly set the world alight. Nor did woman reading, painted a few years later in Paris. While studying, Henri spent 6 years trying to copy this. It's a painting of a fish and a cat by Chardin. Producing this, I think I prefer the one by Chardin. Matisse held some wild parties, played the violin a lot, shot at fishermen with a pea shooter. He fell in love with his model Camille, who bore him a daughter. But then he fell in love with someone else, Amélie, and married her instead. Amélie bore him 2 sons and brought up his daughter. He painted this in 1897. He'd clearly discovered Impressionism. And this in 1904, more colourful, but still not wholly original.
But the biggest breakthrough happened not in Paris, but in the south of France. And to be honest, I can't wait to get there.
In 1905, Matisse travelled south on the journey that transformed his art and his life. He was in his mid-30s, broke, with 3 kids. He'd worked furiously for 15 years, as he put it, like a drunken brute trying to kick the door down. But he still hadn't found his own voice.
Matisse said about his early years in Paris that when he was young he felt a bit like someone stumbling about in a dark wood with no clear idea of where he was heading. Which, in a sense, isn't quite true, because he really knew that above all, he needed to paint. That was absolutely his vocation. He was completely certain about it when he told his wife, Amélie, "Mademoiselle, I love you dearly, but I shall always love painting more." Which is quite an astounding thing to say, really. I've just got engaged, and I don't think I could get away with saying something like that and hope to keep in the relationship.
Henri and Amélie must have wondered if this fierce obsession would ever lead to anything other than poverty.
But something about the south of France changed everything.
This is the small fishing town of Collioure on the Mediterranean coast in France. In fact, it's so far south, it's almost in Spain. And just look around. The first thing that really strikes you is the very brilliant quality of the light and the strong, powerful, very saturated colours. And these were things that Matisse was always searching for.
Matisse was staggered by the intensity of what he saw and felt here. And the radical way he chose to capture it on canvas would horrify the art establishment.
His way through painting yet. He still feels all these earlier...
To discover why, I'm meeting Matisse expert Alistair Wright.
So this is where he painted one of the great paintings of that summer. This is the Roofs of Collioure from 1905. It's around this time that he starts quoting an aphorism, which was that a kilogram of green is greener than half a kilogram of green. What Matisse took that to mean is that if you want your colors to seem intense, you have to use more of them. You can't break them up into small areas. You have to put on a big slab of red if you want it to really sound as red in the painting. He's starting to use colors in ways that have never been done before in the history of Western painting. And I think for him, it's a fragile moment. He's scared. He doesn't know where he's going.
Matisse's blocks of wild colour barely resembled the real world and broke every established rule. Over centuries, the craft of painting had been refined. There were conventions of light, shadow, perspective, and imperceptible brushwork. But to capture his feelings about Collioure, Matisse decided to ignore all that.
So can you believe that this is one of the settings for a great turning point in modern art?
Yeah, it's a nondescript setting, but this is where it all began to change.
This used to be a cafe, did it?
It was a cafe, and Matisse rented a room above it. Now it's an estate agent's.
This was the window that he opened and...
Yeah, this is the room that he rented in Collioure for the summer. And it's from here that he painted the open window.
The first thing that strikes me is that you look out, it doesn't look anything like that painting. He transformed what he saw.
The colours become elements that he can arrange on the canvas without reference to what's out there in reality, and those colours can then sing together.
Van Gogh's generation had started to free colour from simply imitating what we see. But no one had gone anything like as far as Matisse.
So you've brought along this colour wheel, and it looks very pretty, but what is it? What does it tell us about Matisse?
Well, this is a colour wheel that Matisse himself knew. It's put together in the 1830s by a scientist called Chevreul, who'd investigated the way the human eye sees colour. Complementary colours simply meant two colours from opposite sides of the wheel. So green was the complement of red, orange was the complement of blue. What had happened with the preceding generation of painters, to Matisse, they'd become very interested in this. And the colour combination that they'd become particularly interested in was yellow and blue. What Matisse does is to move around the colour wheel. So instead of working primarily with yellow and blue highlights, he starts working with green and red. As they're put together on the canvas, they jar. He very quickly becomes the #1 bad boy of French painting. All of the critics know his work. They all know they don't like it, but they know they have to take him seriously. They have a sense that this is where painting is going in the future.
Next, the bad boy produced an extraordinary portrait of his wife, Amélie. Its primitive simplicity and impulsive strokes of jarring, ferocious colour were another attack on the traditional rules of painting. Matisse was rubbished for painting like a fauve, French for wild animal. His next creation wasn't only dazzling and primal, it was vast, nearly 10 feet across. Over the next 5 years, his paintings continued to push the boundaries of form and colour by portraying an emotional response to reality rather than merely replicating the external world. Most French collectors considered Matisse a lunatic, But luckily for his bank balance, a Russian textile magnate began buying up his work in bulk. To find out more, I've come to St. Petersburg.
Matisse came here to Russia in 1911. He was invited by one of his great patrons, the super wealthy Moscow industrialist Sergei Shukin. Shukin was quite a mysterious, larger-than-life character. He was just loaded with cash, and he used to travel the world searching for objects of great beauty. He was really into contemporary art, a bit like Charles Saatchi of his day. In 1906, he bought his first Matisse. I'm on my way now in this boxy Russian taxi to meet